With the 2025 season reaching its climax, everybody's now shifting their attention over to the upcoming 2026 season. And one of the main topics dominating all the headlines is the upcoming silly season we're going to see in 2026 regarding the 2027 contracts. Of course, 2027 is the year that MotoGP undergoes a massive regulation change, and as a result, pretty much the entire grid is out of a contract for that year, with no team being able to guarantee their riders the best bike. And with pretty much everybody looking for a new contract, it could be absolute chaos, and I'm really looking forward to it this season. So what I want to do is try and unpack what might happen in this upcoming silly season. So in the few months and weeks before the season starts, I'm going to try and analyse certain riders, mainly the most in-demand riders, and analyse where they could possibly go for the 2027 season. Today we're starting off with Marc Marquez because naturally, he's the world champion. He's going to be the most in demand going into 2027. So today we're going to be looking at Marc Marquez's potential options for the 2027 season. And at the end, I'll give my very early predictions on what I think is going to happen. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. Now, we're going to start with the options where I think there is little to no chance of them happening. First off, Aprilia. I think there's zero chance of him going to Aprilia. Aprilia don't have the financial power, I think, to try and entice him over. They also aren't the biggest manufacturer, so there's no guarantee they're going to be a competitive bike in 2027. They, I think, have the smallest team of any manufacturer, so I think the odds of them being at the top in 2027 is probably the lowest of any team. So I think Aprilia just won't even bother trying to go for him. They'll probably explore much cheaper options, and I don't see Marquez going there in the slightest. Same with Yamaha, in my opinion. This one isn't completely impossible, but it just doesn't make sense to me. I can't envision Marc Marquez going to Yamaha. Yamaha will be focused on trying to keep Quartararo on their books, but even if he does leave, signing Marc Marquez would not be the solution. Unless Yamaha come forwards this year and have by far the best bike on the grid, I don't see them being able to entice Marquez over, especially after their disastrous season just gone. So I don't see Marquez going to Yamaha either, and I also don't see him going to KTM. Now, Marquez has been rumoured to go to KTM in the past. There were rumours about him going there in 2024 and 2025 for those seasons, but now I don't think there's pretty much any chance of that happening. KTM still have a lot of financial uncertainty. I know they've sorted out some of their issues, but I still don't think it's completely plain sailing. And also their future in the sport is in doubt. There's been talks of CF Moto taking their spot on the grid in 2027. We have no idea whether KTM will still be on the grid, so Marquez is going to want to have a very secure contract, so I don't see him going there at all. So that leaves two manufacturers he could potentially go to. We'll start by talking about the one he's currently at, which is of course Ducati. I think staying at Ducati would probably be the most obvious option there is for Marc Marquez, considering he's already there, and Ducati have been the dominant bike for the past 4 years. Marquez obviously dominated the championship with them last year. You'd think that staying with Ducati would be the most sensible choice. However, there's no guarantee that Ducati are going to do well when the regulations change. We even saw their grasp on the top of MotoGP started to slip at the end of last year. They really messed up their 2025 bike. It was clear the GP24 was much better. It was clear towards the end of last year that Ducati were no longer the fastest manufacturer. It was clear to me that Aprilia was a faster bike, and Ducati's grasp on the top of MotoGP has slowly been fading in recent months. And if that trend continues, Marc Marquez could end up not winning the championship, and that would seriously disappoint him. And I think if Ducati gives him a poor bike which he can't fight for a title with, he would want to move on, I think. However, Ducati were the ones who were able to give Marquez's career a revival, really. So part of me thinks that Marc Marquez might want to stay loyal to them. However, I saw that Marquez said in an interview recently that his next contract choice would be a selfish one, so maybe he won't be staying at Ducati, who knows. I think it massively depends on what happens next year. If Ducati, regress even further and become not the fastest manufacturer, I could see him wanting to move on. And I think it also depends on how the other Ducati riders perform. Of course, Ducati have Pecco Bagnaia on their books, who had a disastrous season last year, but he is also a double world champion. I fully expect him to get back to good form next year, and if he's able to fight Marquez for the championship, Ducati might consider keeping Bagnaia considering he's much younger than Marquez. Ducati also have the likes of Firmin Aldeguer, who it is clear to me that they see him as the future of the team. If Aldeguer has a really good season next year, they could look towards pushing him into the factory team. They also have people like Alex Marquez, who, if he has another season like last season, he could have a very credible shout at a factory bike, or a factory team slot really. Ducati have a very strong rider lineup, so I think if they were to lose Marc Marquez, they probably wouldn't feel the effects that badly. Like when Honda lost Marc Marquez, they tried everything they could to keep him, and when he left, they sunk massively. Whereas Ducati, if they lost Marc Marquez, it'd obviously be a big blow, but I think if any team, they would be the one who would be able to deal with it the best. Of course, also with Ducati having been the dominant bike for the past 4 years, they probably have the most pull in terms of getting other riders to join them. People like Quartararo, Acosta, maybe even a return for Jorge Martin. People like that, I think Ducati have the best chance of being able to pull one of them over to their factory team to replace Marc Marquez. So honestly, I think the odds of him staying at Ducati aren't as high as some people may think. Obviously with him still being there and with how well the last 2 seasons have gone for him, I still think that the chances of him staying there are pretty high. However, I still think there is a solid chance that he looks for a move away, and the main place he could go really is Honda. Of course, Marc Marquez and Honda have such an iconic partnership with each other. Marquez won 6 world titles on a Honda, he got dozens of Grand Prix victories, and, you know, it was very weird at first not seeing Marc Marquez on the Honda. And, you know, when Marc Marquez left Honda, he spoke about him wanting to go back to Honda one day. He said he hoped their paths would cross again one day. And honestly, I think if there is a chance for Marquez to go back to Honda, 2027 would be the perfect time to do it, because nobody will be able to guarantee him the best bike. So going to Honda wouldn't be that much of a gamble really, because wherever he goes, it would be a gamble. Honda are also one of the biggest manufacturers in MotoGP. They have a massive factory, so I think they probably have the best odds, not the best, but one of the best odds of getting it right in 2027. As well as that, they also have a lot of financial muscle to get Marc Marquez to rejoin them. I know Marquez said that, you know, it's not about the money, but however, I'm sure that Honda having the extra financial muscle to sign him would not harm them at all. And in terms of for Honda, I think signing Marc Marquez would make perfect sense for them. They need a star rider to take them into the future. The crop of riders they have at the moment is good, but they're never going to win a championship with the current set of riders. I know Diogo Moreira has a lot of potential, but by 2027, he won't be ready to fight for a title. They need somebody in 2027 who will be ready to fight for a title immediately. And Marc Marquez could very well be that guy, and I think it would make the most sense, honestly, out of all of Honda's options. The amount of money they'd get from just re-signing him in general would get them so much more money. It would return the iconic partnership, and honestly, in 2027, they'd probably still be getting the best rider on the grid. So to be honest, if they are able to entice Marc over, I think there's a good chance that he will be able to, at the very least, fight for a title with them. And like I mentioned earlier, Marquez said that his next move in MotoGP would be a selfish one. And I think going back to Honda and ditching Ducati after 3 years, would be quite a selfish move for him. You know, going back to Honda where it felt like home for him. That seems like a selfish move which Marquez would take if the offer comes across. However, Marc Marquez has said in interviews that he's going to take his time with his decision. And if he does choose Honda, he will want to know that it is definitely the right choice. And I think whether he chooses Honda or not would depend massively on how they perform next year. Honda obviously took a massive step forward in 2025. However, I think to entice Marc over, they would need to take another big step up. Last year they got 4 podiums, including a race victory. I think they need to, at least double that podium tally. They need to fight for podiums pretty regularly. They need to get at least top 3 in the Constructors' Championship to have a chance at enticing him over. Because if they have a pretty stagnant year, if they make no progress from this year, I don't see Marquez wanting to go over. But if they're able to take another step up, then, I think the chances of being able to get him over are pretty strong. Overall, I do think that the odds of Marquez going back to Honda are probably the same as the odds of him staying at Ducati, really. We all know the history between Marquez and Honda. both parties have expressed a desire to reunite one day, and I think if it doesn't happen in 2027, then it may never happen. So I honestly think that going to Honda is a very strong option for Marc Marquez. However, there is one other option which I think has a much less chance of happening, but I'm not going to rule it out at all until it's announced that he doesn't do this, and that is the option of retirement for Marc Marquez. Now, this would be a bombshell of an announcement, and it's a possibility that hasn't really been talked about, but I still think there's a fairly significant chance that Marc Marquez chooses to hang up his helmet at the end of next year. I think the odds of him retiring depend entirely on whether he wins the title next year. If he does not win the title, then I think he'll stay on for an extra few years, because to me, I think Marquez will want to get that 10th world title, break Valentino Rossi's record. I think he wants to achieve that before he retires. However, if he does win the title next year, I think he could seriously be considering retiring, especially after his most recent injury in Indonesia, which kept him out for the entirety of the back end of last season. And with all of his injury problems in the past, if Marquez wins his 10th world title, reach the pinnacle of MotoGP, getting the most Premier Class titles, he might think to himself, well, is there much more for me to achieve? Having the most titles is pretty much the pinnacle of any sport, really. So if he wins the 10th title, then he might think that, well, I've reached the top, why would I continue and risk injury when I've already achieved as much as I can? Of course, he wouldn't have achieved absolutely everything. He might want to stay on and try to beat Rossi's win record in the Premier Class. He might want to beat Agostini's record for the most wins in all classes. There's a good chance that he wants to continue and try to beat those records as well. We know Marc, he's an extremely competitive rider, and I do think that even if he does win the title, I think it is more likely that he stays on for an extra few years. I do think, though, that the possibility of him retiring is a fairly significant one. And I think that, the further along we go with him not announcing what he's doing, I think the chances of him retiring are higher. If we get towards May, June, and he's still not announced what he's doing, I think there's a good chance that he's seriously considering retirement. And like I keep mentioning, Marquez said that his next move would be a selfish one, and I think that retiring would be the most selfish thing he could possibly do. But honestly, with all of the injuries he's had across his career, I wouldn't blame him at all, really. However, for me, I think Marquez is the sort of rider who would want to continue for as long as he thinks he's able to fight for a title. I think as soon as he thinks that he's no longer able to contend at the top, that's when he'll retire. So it depends on how he feels at the end of next year, really. But overall, I think 33 would be a very young age for him to retire, and at the end of next year, he would probably still have a lot to give. So I think that the odds of him retiring are much lower than the odds of him staying at Ducati or going to Honda. But I still think that, it's a possibility which is worth talking about, because there's definitely a world where he retires at the end of this year, or next year, I guess. So with those being the three main options for Marquez, in my opinion, it's time for me to now decide which of them I think will happen. And as much as I talked about Marquez potentially retiring, I think it is the least likely option of the three options we've got here. I think there is a world where he does retire, but I don't think it will happen. Like I said, Marquez, to me, he seems like the sort of rider who will want to continue for as long as he is able to fight for titles. And unless he has a monumental drop-off or he has another bad injury next year, I think he'll want to continue. So let's hope he doesn't get injured, and let's hope he stays on the grid. So that leaves the main two options being Ducati or Honda. And honestly, I'm predicting that he'll go to Honda. To me, I think it's just a match made in heaven for them. We know how much it hurt Marc Marquez having to leave Honda. He really didn't want to do it. He gave them as many second chances as possible. And now the Honda finally got their act together. I think 2027 would be the perfect time for him to return, and it'd be the perfect place for him to end his career, really. Ducati, like I mentioned earlier, it would definitely hurt them missing out on Marc Marquez, and they definitely don't want to lose Marquez. But however, if any team was able to lose Marc Marquez, I think Ducati would be the ones who would deal with it best. They have the best rider lineup on the grid already, even without Marc Marquez, in my opinion, and they have some very bright young riders to bring forwards. And they also have a lot of pull in terms of bringing people like Quartararo or Acosta over to the factory team to get them to replace Marc Marquez. So honestly, I think that he will leave Ducati, and I think they'll be fine without him. and I think Marc Marquez will end up at Honda for 2027. But that's just my opinion, so now I want to know what you guys think. So let me know in the comments below. Where do you think Marc Marquez will end up in 2027? Will he stay at Ducati? Will he go back to Honda? Will he retire, or will he go somewhere completely different? Let me know what you think in the comments. And while you're there, make sure to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel. I'm really sorry for the lack of consistency on this channel. At this point, I'm just going to stop making promises. I hope to get another video out before New Year, but I'm not going to make any promises because I don't want to disappoint you all again. But yeah, thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you guys soon, hopefully. Bye bye.